My favorite scene in Wicked happens during the Defying Gravity sequence. Elphaba, masterfully played by Cynthia Erivo, has just spent the entire song expositing to Glinda, incredibly played by Ariana Grande Butera, why she's choosing to defy the wizard's wishes. Something has changed within me, Elfie sings. Something is not the same. They're in this attic like space in the wizard's lair in Emerald City. The space looks like it's been left alone for a long time, and dust has settled in it like undisturbed snow. There are boxes and forgotten clothes, and if you look closely, you'll see that some of this stuff was brought over by the wizard himself the first time he flew to Oz. Anyway, in this scene, Elphaba has managed to cast a spell on the broom that was laying unused in the attic for God knows how long. She has on the black hat that Galinda gave to her one night, initially to make fun of her, but that ended up being the first night they became friends. And in this scene, Elphaba's saying goodbye to her best friend, who never had it in her to rebel against authority the way that she's daring to. But before they say goodbye, Glinda says, "Elfie, you're trembling." And in between tears, she goes off and desperately searches anywhere in the attic for something that will give her friend even just a little bit of comfort and warmth, knowing that this could possibly be the last time that they're seeing each other. She reaches a rack covered by a black cloth designed to keep the dust off of the clothes underneath it, but instead of finding something that was on the rack, she gravitates towards the black dust cover itself. Again, a forgotten thing, that black cloth was never meant to be shown to the outside world. It was just fulfilling a function. But as Glinda wraps the cloth around Elphaba, she all of a sudden becomes everything Oz grows to fear. With her black hat, her black cape, and her broom, she becomes the Wicked Witch of the West. Hello and welcome back to A Love Letter 2. I'm your host, Danielle Olavario, and I'm so excited for this episode. One reason is that this kicks off a little mini-series in the pod where we're going to be talking about some of the Oscar picks this season over the next few weeks until the Oscar ceremony on March 3rd. Obviously, there's going to be spoilers in the show, so please keep that in mind before listening, but today, as you heard in the opening sequence, we're going to be talking about one of my favorite movies to come out last year, Wicked. I cried nonstop in the cinema. I still listen to the soundtrack daily. I've watched, listened, and read the interviews. I've followed and held space, for the press tour, like so many of you, and I think that it's an objectively good film. It's also my favorite to win the Best Costume Design Oscar this year because not only is every garment you see on screen meticulously well made, and you can credit the costume designer Paul Tazewell for that, but because I think, just like Poor Things, it's one of these movies that really use the clothes and the props as part of the story. They help move the story forward. But also, it becomes a little bit meta because the clothes are imbued to the story itself. They're important materials. Let me explain. The story of the Wizard of Oz is iconic, and I'm using that in the most literal sense of the word. I mean that it's filled with recognizable symbols and imagery that was established over 100 years ago, and yet still remain in the public memory. Even before the movie that shot Judy Garland to stardom, The Wonderful Wizard of Oz had already been a part of so many people's childhoods. It was written in the 1900s by the author L. Frank Baum and illustrated by W. W. Denslow. So that's a full almost 40 years before the movie came out. Just after the opening sequence in the movie, this dedication was written. For nearly 40 years, this story has given faithful service to the young in heart, and time has been powerless to put its kindly philosophy out of fashion. To those of you who have been faithful to it in return, and to the young in heart, we dedicate this picture. So, the history of this tale and the images we ascribe to it is long and storied and has become a pillar for pop culture. When I say, for example, the yellow brick road or ruby slippers, you immediately have that image in your head and the association it has with the Wizard of Oz. When I say, that girl is dressed like Dorothy, you immediately think braided pigtails, checkered white and blue dress, red slippers. And of course, when I say the Wicked Witch of the West, you would immediately think of the green skin, the hooked nose, warts on the face maybe, and the black outfit, the black cape with the matching pointy hat. Wicked is essentially a backstory on how the Wicked Witch of the West came to be and her friendship with Glinda the Good Witch. The book was written by Gregory Maguire with illustrations by Douglas Smith and is like approximately 54 shades darker than the musical and therefore the movie. Both, however, unpack the different aspects that have made Elphaba the Wicked Witch. It's a story about friendship, as has been highlighted over and over again by the cast during the press tour, but it's also a story about politics, about propaganda, and about the use of appearance as a tool for deception. These themes were already there from the beginning. There's a whole Wikipedia page of the political readings of The Wonderful Wizard of Oz, which includes interpretations surrounding about monetary policy, which was a huge debate at the time the book was published. Other readings say that there are different social groups that each character represented. For example, the Scarecrow is a representation for farmers, the Tin Man is the steel industry, and the Lion is the military. This political and social undercurrent isn't lost in the movie at all, and it coming out now is actually rather timely. Surveillance is a big theme in the movie. The control of information is another one, and the tactics that the government use to alter the truth for the public is also a huge one. At one point in the film, Jeff Goldblum, who plays the wizard, says, "The best way to bring folks together is to give them a real good enemy." This all sounds rather familiar, does it not? Anyway, all this to say, the clothing in Oz in this movie functions as more than just personal style and personal evolution like they did in the movie Poor Things from the last episode we talked about, for example. They also become tools for influence and manipulation. So let's talk about Elphaba's wardrobe. One of the things that really struck me watching interviews and the press tour around this film is how much thought and intention there was for every aspect of it. Stripping it back to Elphaba's base appearance, obviously Elphaba is played by Cynthia Erivo, a black woman, and she reiterated time and time again her desire to show the character, yes, but not erase the person underneath it. So they went with green skin, obviously, it's integral to the Wicked Witch story, but also micro braids as a callback to Cynthia. And I think also that works when you think about Elphaba as a character who is constantly ostracized for the color of her skin. The green contacts was also very intentional. There was a desire for Cynthia to show that greenness isn't just on Elphaba's skin. It isn't just surface level, that greenness is who she is even on the inside. It's in her eyes and it's even on her nails. If you really look and pay attention to the nails that she has on the film, they're sort of like this green, sort of like blue-greeny color. The freckles were meticulously painted in each day, and they used a template to make sure that the freckles were always in the same position every time they film. The simple black clothing that Elphaba constantly wears is as much of a marker of how different she is as is the color of her skin. Remember how colorful Oz is and how opulent a lot of the people's clothing choices are. The movie from 1939, The Wizard of Oz, was a call to that. Okay, it went from sepia when Dorothy is in Kansas to full Technicolor in Oz. And that was part because it was a new technology at that time, but also a marker for how magical the world is. So Elphaba, being always in simple black frocks, even from when she was younger, is really interesting. It sets her apart from the rest of the world that she's living in. And I think the message evolves here, it's different. It says something different about Elphaba from when she was younger versus to when she was grown. When she was younger, it was a marker of her being marginalized. It was the people around her telling her, you do not belong here. It was the bullies that constantly berated her. It was her father, who I presumed dressed her as a kid, saying to her, even in her clothing, I don't want you here. The black hat that Glinda gives her is a marker of that too. As she grew older and more powerful, we see her choosing still to wear black and dark colors, even though she would have had the option to change her style, to change her outfit. Hell, she was very, very close friends with Glinda. She could have worn the pink. She could have like really tried to fit in. But I think there's the message that goes there from a powerless acceptance of how the people around her have chosen to paint her, to a reclamation, to her saying, yes, I'm different. I stand apart from you because I have the guts to stand up for what is right and you don't. This is then, of course, weaponized against her later on. When Glinda gives her that black cape in the Defying Gravity sequence, it was a symbol of acceptance of who she was on Glinda's part. You know, it was her seeing that Elfie is trembling, that there's this sense of anxiety there, even though Elphaba had said, I'm not afraid, the wizard should be the one who's afraid of me. Of course she's still trembling because she's about to do something that no other person had ever done before. Nobody had ever defied the wizard before. And she knew, I think, what was about to happen. So Glinda putting that black cape on her, it wasn't to dress her up to be like, you know, a villain in the story. It wasn't intentional like that. It was more so, my friend is trembling, let me find something to sort of comfort her, to keep her warm. But then that cape is used by Madame Morrible to paint her as a horrific, powerful liar. When she eventually flies to the skies, we see the cape billowing around her in such an awe-inspiring way, and behind her there was a storm brewing. So remember that Madame Morrible's specialty is the control of weather. So here she's painting Elphaba in such a way that made her a lot more menacing than she actually was. She then delivers a message to the citizens of Oz. She says, there is an enemy who must be found and captured. Believe nothing she says. She has stolen our grimoire. She is evil, responsible for the mutilation of these poor innocent monkeys, which, by the way, was Madame Morrible and the wizards doing. She continues on, her green skin is but an outward manifestorium of her twisted nature. This distortion, this repulsion, this wicked witch. So here we see Madame Morrible is just truly the queen of propaganda. But Madame Morrible uses innocent aspects of Elphaba's appearance, the green skin she had no control over, the hat Glinda gave her at the start of their friendship, the cape her best friend gave her for warmth, and uses them all as a weapon to turn the citizens of Oz against her. Elphaba wasn't the only person whose appearance was used as a weapon. Glinda was one of them too. From the very beginning, we see Glinda as blonde and wearing a lot of pink. In fact, in the whole of Shiz, she's the only person whose uniform is pink. It's giving Sharpay Evans and her infamous Barbie pink double locker in East High. But when we first meet Glinda, she introduces herself as Glinda Upland of the Upper Uplands. She has about 1,000 luggages with her. We know that she also managed to get a private suite, unlike her classmates. All this to say that everything about her screams of privilege and wealth. When she was a student at Shiz, her wardrobe didn't really vary much, aside from the special scandalocious one that she wears at Oz does. But from the start, we knew her knowledge and understanding of what I can only describe as like PR strategy. It's even incorporated in one of the songs she sings, Popular. She sings, think of celebrated heads of state or especially great communicators. Did they have brains or knowledge? Don't make me laugh. They were popular. This is a bit of a foreshadowing of the wizard himself being exposed as just a non-magical man later on in the film, who basically just used appearance and manipulation to get people to believe in him and follow him. But in the same song, she even pitches herself to Elphaba as someone who can be very useful to her later on. She sings, "With an assist for me to be who you'll be instead of dreary who you are, there's nothing that can stop you from becoming popular." And here we see, I think, the huge difference in the approach between Elphaba and Glinda. Elphaba isn't scared to torch everything to the ground to enact change. In fact, she'd rather do that than what she says, grovel in submission in the face of an authoritarian figure that she doesn't believe in. Whereas Glinda knows very well that revolutions sometimes call for much more delicate and subtle approaches. During Defying Gravity, Glinda explains this to Elphaba. She says in the beginning of the song, "I hope you're happy, how you've hurt your cause forever. I hope you think you're clever." And I believe that the subtext here is her explaining to Elphaba that they can enact change much more effectively from the inside by cooperating with the wizard and the establishment, and in the process making changes gradually and peacefully. But in flying off the handle, as Glinda calls it, Elphaba has ruined any chance she had at that, and now she must fully face the wizard and the influence that the wizard has over its citizens. And I think Glinda knows. She's smart. She knows that this is not going to end well for Elphaba. When she sings, "You can have all you ever wanted," what she means isn't just that Elphaba can be de-greenified or have a sense of belonging finally. She means you can have all you ever wanted for the animals if you were to go about this in a smarter and in a calmer way. I think that Glinda's appearance in part 2 of Wicked for Good, will dramatically change from what we see in part 1, from her wardrobe in Shiz. And I think Madame Morrible, even ever the mastermind of propaganda, is instrumental in this. Because like at the Defying Gravity sequence, we see her leading Glinda away at the end of the song. And here I think we see she had realized that Glinda could be useful for her. We get a taste of that change in aesthetic then in what is essentially the ending of the story, but we're shown in the beginning of the movie in No One Mourns the Wicked, with her coming down on a bubble and wearing this fabulous glittery pink gown and a tiara, and she has on, she had with her like a magic wand. And at that point of the story, Glinda has become a figurehead of Ozian politics. The wizard has fled, Elphaba, as far as she knows, is dead, and Madame Morrible is in prison. She's the most powerful individual in all of the land. So she wears these gowns and starts carrying a wand, even though she had no or very little magic, to project a sense of purity, a sense of charm, and like legitimacy. If you notice in the beginning, her bubble isn't made of magic. There's a button that she steps on to form the bubble around her. And in this way, she is kind of like a mini-me of the wizard himself. And maybe there's a bit of an allegory here about the only kind of person or strategy that can survive politics. I think that politics in its essence requires pulling the hood over people's eyes. And I think no matter how honorable a politician might be or which side of the aisle they sit in, that cannot be helped. You know, politics is a game of appearances. I can talk for years about the costume in Wicked because I think that it really does highlight the intersection of politics, of power, and of personal identity. And I think that this is why it's so important to talk about what politicians wear. You know, every time there's an inauguration, fashion writers like Vanessa Friedman from the New York Times and Robin Givhan or Rachel Tashjian from the Washington Post will always zoom in on the clothing that the main characters wear. You know, why Michelle Obama is wearing maroon, for example, or who is dressing Melania Trump this time around. And they always get so much flack for it because people think that clothing and fashion is surface level or frivolous and not relevant to the very serious business of politics. But I think that this movie really shows that no matter how frivolous it may seem, it is important to think about what politicians wear and what message they're trying to convey with their clothing, because they will use it. They will use whatever resources they have in their power to project a certain image. Like, I remember when the Ukraine war just started happening and we were seeing the Ukrainian president Zelensky in a lot of like jeans and hoodies because they were essentially running the government from like a basement somewhere. And then out of nowhere, the French president Macron came out wearing a black hoodie and a pair of jeans instead of his usual suits. Keeping in mind, Zelensky was getting a lot of support from everyone at the time at the start of the Ukrainian war. And I think when these things happen, when a person who usually wears, a very powerful person, a president of a country who usually wears suits suddenly comes out and wearing a hoodie and jeans, it's worth taking the time to pause and think, now, why did he do that? This person who has probably every tailor in the world at his disposal and endless resources to design any clothing that he chooses to put on, why has he all of a sudden now, at this moment, got on a hoodie and jeans in the office? And that's why I think Wicked is really deserving of the Oscar for Best Costume Design, and I haven't even gotten into the actual technicalities of the garments themselves, and for that I would really recommend going to the costume designer Paul Tazewell's Instagram page. He posts a lot of the costume and close-ups too of their details on there, but what he has essentially done is create an Aussian haute couture house. The embroidery and the detail that went with every piece of clothing is so mind-blowing, and I think that's why he should win. It's because he balanced the narrative with the technical aspects of creating clothes so beautifully. And I'm so in awe of his work in this film. And honestly, he constantly spotlights his team, the cutters, embroiderers, tailors, seamstresses, etc. It was truly the work of a village, the costumes that you see in this film. Anyway, I'm sure that I've missed so many more talking points about this movie, but now that's your job to let me know what those talking points are. Let's have a conversation and geek about Wicked in the comments. I would love nothing more. This has been A Love Letter To. I've been your host, Danielle Olavario. Thank you so much for being with me and listening to this episode. I'm really looking forward to next week when we will be talking about Nosferatu, which made me so happy. It's the first proper horror film that I actually really enjoyed and would watch again. But until then, give us a follow on our socials at A Love Letter To Podcast on everything. I'm at Danielle Olavario on everything. If you enjoyed this episode, do leave us a review wherever you're listening. It really does help the show. And feel free to send me a love DM about what you think of the episode and what movies you want me to go through next, especially after the Oscars on March 3rd. That's all from me, and I'll see you guys next week. Bye!